My name is Jaden, and to an outside observer, I might have seemed like someone cradled by lifelong luxury. The reality is that I was raised in an expansive residence situated on a suburban Seattle hillside. It was a traditional mansion spanning more than 18,000 square feet, featuring a suspended garden and a private pond valued at over $60 million. Yet its priceless quality was never about figures. My father, Daniel Brooks, was an accomplished architect who designed corporate landmarks and also devoted 15 years to constructing that home. Each stone and every beam was infused with his vision and commitment. We never referred to it as a mansion. To my dad, it was a residence founded on principles. He often stated, "A genuine home is constructed not with currency, but with the character of its inhabitants." My mother, Helen, taught finance at a community college. She didn't wear designer outfits or carry costly purses, but a single session of her lecture would reveal why my father adored her so deeply. She transformed intricate ideas about investment, saving, and budgeting into motivational narratives, and she implemented those teachings into our family life with steadfast discipline. I still recall being 8 years old and asking my mother for a video game system because all my friends owned one. She simply smiled and inquired, "Would you like to learn how to purchase it yourself with your own money?" So I began doing household tasks, folding laundry, mowing the grass, even assisting in organizing my parents' small library. It took almost 4 months to save the required amount. When I finally brought the console home, my mother remarked, "You didn't merely acquire an object, you learned the authentic worth of money." Although my family possessed considerable wealth, my parents elected to send me to the local public school, where my friends were unaware of the financial scale my parents engaged with daily. I rode the bus to school, ate sandwiches my mom prepared, and never wore conspicuous jewelry. Once, when invited to a friend's home, my mother advised me, "Jaden, don't discuss our house unless someone asks. Let your character be what people recall, not your address." I learned to live modestly within a context where people presumed I had it all. But the truth was, I was taught that the most precious possession isn't a large house or a bank statement. It is how I treat people, how I confront difficulties, and the integrity behind each choice. My father once brought me to the top floor of our house, a study adorned with walnut wood and windows gazing over the entire city. He stood there, arms folded, looked at me and said, "Jaden, one day this house will belong to you. But remember, that does not mean you belong to wealth. Let your value derive from your actions, not your inheritance." I was too youthful then to grasp his words completely, yet in retrospect, each syllable feels engraved into the bricks of my memory. That house was more than shelter. It was a silent testament that nothing is more durable than ethics and integrity, particularly in a world where greed perpetually knocks. I matured with that philosophy, carrying within me a tranquil realm many never perceive. But I never forgot my father's instruction. Wealth without comprehension leads only to forfeiture. And I clung to that belief until the person I loved most demolished everything I held sacred. I once believed that living humbly amid affluence was the optimal shield against judgment. But it appears that silence itself can sometimes invite others to invent narratives about you. When I was 12, an incident occurred that utterly transformed my perspective on friendship and financial limits. I was in 7th grade at Rockage Middle School, an unpretentious institution full of color and character. I had a tight-knit group of 3 friends, Chloe, Natalie, and Madison. Natalie was the most extroverted, constantly laughing, always chatting, and the first to ask, "Jaden, is it true your house has an elevator? A private movie theater, too?" I offered a half smile and did not reply. I didn't want my friends to perceive me as different. I cherished our lunch breaks with cafeteria cookies, our playful games on the field, and I sincerely believed our bond was authentic. Then Chloe's gaming console broke. It was a new console her father had given her for her birthday, and she had proudly brought it to school. During recess, she handed it to me to try. I still remember the cold sensation in my palm when it slipped and struck the cement floor with a sharp crack. The screen went dark. Chloe stared at me, not crying, but her lips quivered. I promptly apologized and stated I would find a way to repair or replace it. That evening, I told my mother. She observed me for a long moment, then gently said, "Jaden, you can apologize. You can locate a repair shop, but you cannot use family funds to rectify mistakes made without ill intent. You will have to assume responsibility through your own effort." It took me 2 weeks of odd jobs and saving before I brought the console to a repair shop near the school. But when I returned it to Chloe, she did not smile. Natalie, standing beside her, interjected, "For someone rich like him, a few $100s is nothing. Are you even sure that's your console, Chloe?" I froze. That cold feeling returned. The next day, rumors began circulating that I had broken it deliberately to replace it with an inferior one, that I had stolen Chloe's console and swapped it. Madison didn't speak, but the manner in which she avoided my gaze said enough. The vice principal learned of it when a group of students filed a complaint, something I later discovered Natalie orchestrated. My father took time off work to come to school. During the meeting with the principal, he sat quietly through all the allegations, then calmly produced warranty papers, the repair receipt, and a confirmation letter from the repair shop. He simply stated, "I taught my son that truth does not need to shout. It merely needs to stand firm." I was exonerated. Natalie and Chloe were reprimanded for disseminating false information, but what I will never forget was not their penalty. It was what my father whispered to me as we exited the school office. "Jaden, some individuals will only see your wallet, never your heart. Do not allow those people to define your worth." After that, I distanced myself from that friend group. I ceased sharing much about my personal life. I learned how to politely decline when someone asked to borrow lunch money or hinted I should pay the bill. I wasn't cold, simply more cautious. Once, Natalie encountered me outside a grocery store and sneered, "Still shopping at discount stores? I thought you only dined at 5-star restaurants." I merely nodded because by then I understood one thing clearly. You need not justify yourself to people who have already chosen not to believe in you. Years later, I still keep that old gaming console, scratched, worn, and no longer functional. But to me, it is a memento of the value of refusal, of the initial wounds trust can inflict, and of how I learned that sometimes genuine wealth is the capacity to stand alone without losing yourself. I met Jack when I was 35 at a finance seminar in Denver, where I was a guest speaker on digital banking security. He was an attendee in the 3rd row and the only one brave enough to pose a challenging question after my presentation. Is there a line between technological convenience and the cost of personal privacy? The question didn't unsettle me. It intrigued me. He wasn't asking to boast. He was asking to comprehend. After the seminar, we conversed briefly in the coffee area, and I realized Jack was the direct, cheerful type with a distinctive way of thinking. He worked in digital marketing, not wildly successful, but clearly passionate. And more importantly, he had no idea who I was beyond that day's talk, which felt like a relief. We stayed in contact. Initial texts were about work, which gradually became late-night calls, weekend coffees, then short getaways to escape our inboxes. Jack possessed an energy that made life feel lighter. He wasn't impressed by my title, never inquired about my assets, and showed no curiosity about my family. Once I joked, "Aren't you going to Google me?" Jack just shrugged. "I'd rather learn about you from you." After 2 years of dating, we had a small wedding by Lake Tahoe with only family and a few close friends. My mother sat beside me as I had my makeup done and whispered, "Your dad would be smiling if he saw you today." I believed that too. If he were still alive, I think he would have liked Jack, at least initially. After the wedding, Jack moved into the high-rise apartment my parents had purchased for me downtown. A month later, I decided it was time to show Jack the home in the Seattle Hills where I grew up. I hadn't brought anyone there since my father passed away 3 years earlier, partly because I wasn't ready, partly because I feared someone would view it as a trophy. That visit occurred on a sunny Saturday afternoon. When the automatic gate opened, Jack fell silent. He stepped out of the car slowly, as if entering another world. The slate roof, the tall windows catching sunlight through blazing red maple trees, the pond still shimmering like the summers of my childhood. I watched his eyes as he entered the grand hallway lined with the familiar walnut paneling my father had once sketched by hand. "Jaden, you lived here?" His voice was soft. I nodded. "I grew up here." He gave a small laugh, as if still unable to believe it, but I noticed something flicker in his eyes, a curiosity I hadn't seen before. After that day, he began asking more questions. At first, they seemed casual. How long did your dad take to build this? Who manages the garden? Has the house ever been reappraised? But gradually, he mentioned more specific terms: personal assets, inheritance, deed ownership, decision rights. I couldn't deny that something within me grew cautious. I didn't want to think poorly of Jack, the man I had married, but I also couldn't disregard my father's lessons. Those who truly love you will respect your boundaries, even without explanation. A few weeks later, during dinner at our apartment, as I poured wine, Jack suddenly asked, "Jaden, if something ever happened to your mom, who would get ownership of the house in the hills?" I froze, the glass in my hand trembling slightly. Looking him in the eye, I said, "That's a family matter, Jack, and I think you understand that." He smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile I knew. For the first time since we met, I felt a slender, razor-sharp distance forming between two people who had once promised no secrets, and I began to wonder if I had overlooked something in him simply because I trusted too soon. The message from my mother arrived on a Monday morning just as I was about to join a virtual meeting with a bank executive. It contained only a few words: "Jaden, your father needs you." I left the office within 10 minutes. En route to the hospital, my mind raced with speculation. My father had always been healthy. He walked an hour each morning in the backyard garden, ate well, and never missed his checkups. But when I entered the hospital room and saw him lying there with a gaunt face, I knew things were no longer simple. He smiled upon seeing me, but the eyes that once held unshakable resolve were now shadowed with exhaustion. I sat beside him, held his hand, and listened as my mother whispered, "The doctor says it's stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Surgery is no longer an option." I don't recall exactly how I reacted. I only know the world seemed to collapse into a single, heavy ringing in my ears. I had always believed my father was unbreakable, that he would be present for every milestone in my life. But now I had to prepare to lose him. From that day, I paused major work commitments and rearranged my schedule to spend more time at the hospital. I read to him, shared work stories, and sometimes played the jazz music he loved. In those moments, I almost forgot the reality waiting outside. Jack initially seemed supportive. He occasionally brought snacks, asked how things were, and picked me up late at night. But after a few weeks, his patience began to wear. One night, returning home exhausted after a long day at the hospital, I found Jack standing at the door, arms crossed, his usual warmth absent. "Jaden, how long are you planning to keep this up?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I understand you love your parents, but our life also needs attention. You're gone constantly. I feel alone in this marriage." I stood silently, too drained to argue. But inside, something cracked. Was this truly the man who had promised to stand by me through everything? A few weeks later, my father passed away on a quiet morning. My mother and I sat by his side, his hand in mine until the end. I didn't cry. I simply sat there, listening to the monitor fall silent, feeling a part of my heart depart with him. The funeral was held in our family garden, simple and dignified, as he had wished. Throughout the ceremony, Jack was present, polite but distant. He avoided my gaze and barely acknowledged the grief I carried. After the funeral, my mother handed me a thick file. Inside was a meticulously prepared will. My father had left me full ownership of the hillside mansion, the place he once called the heart of the family. The house was valued at nearly $5.5 million, but to me, it was priceless. Jack learned the news from a relative at the funeral, and his demeanor shifted instantly. That night at dinner, he suddenly asked, "So, what are you planning to do with that house?" I looked at him, caution rising within me. "I haven't thought about it yet. Everything is still too fresh." He nodded, then added, "I was just thinking if both of us were on the title, it might make things easier later. Legally, I mean." I didn't respond, but my heart tightened. For the first time, I felt Jack was viewing my father's legacy not as a family heirloom, but as a prize to be claimed. A few days later, I received a call from the family attorney, Mr. Peterson, my father's longtime friend. He confirmed all transfer documents were finalized, and I was the sole legal owner of the house. I stood on the second-floor balcony of the mansion that windy afternoon, gazing at the garden my father had once tended with his own hands, and I silently promised him I would protect this place no matter what. But I never imagined the first person I would need to protect it from was the man sleeping beside me each night. 6 weeks after my father's passing, the atmosphere in our shared apartment grew increasingly tense. Jack could no longer conceal his restlessness. He began asking incessant questions about the legalities of the inherited house. Even though I provided clear answers repeatedly, he kept circling back to the same topic. One evening, as I was sorting through my father's old keepsakes in the study, Jack appeared at the door with a graver expression than usual. He handed me a stack of papers, placed them on the desk, and said casually, "I just met with a lawyer named Jerry Peterson. He's knowledgeable about inheritance laws in Washington. I think we should co-own the house to avoid future complications." I stared at him. "Jack, what are you saying? Why would the ownership need to be changed?" He shrugged, attempting to appear harmless. "We're married, Jaden. What's yours is mine, right? It's just a formality." I sat up straight, my heartbeat quickening. "No, that house is a personal inheritance directly from my father, and you know that." He was quiet for a few seconds, then smiled, but the warmth had vanished from his eyes. "Well, then I guess you won't be surprised to hear I already did it." I froze. "You did what?" Jack pulled out his phone, opened an email, and slid it toward me. It was a scanned copy of a property transfer form stamped pending review. My name, Jaden Brooks, had been crossed out in red ink, replaced with Jack E. Nolan. I was stunned. "What the hell did you do?" "Jerry said I could process the paperwork as a spouse if I could prove vested interest. And guess what? I already paid him $300,000 up front." I shot to my feet, my voice trembling. "You tried to transfer a property in my name without my consent? Are you insane?" "I did what had to be done. If you won't share, I have to protect myself. We can live like roommates if that's more comfortable for you. Otherwise, I think divorce is a reasonable option." Each word struck like a cold blade. The man I once believed would hold my hand through life now stood before me like a stranger, calculating and cold. I took a step back, struggling to remain calm. "Jack, what you've done isn't just illegal, it's betrayal. You took advantage of me and the trust I gave you." He crossed his arms, smirking. "Trust? What trust? You hid your family's entire wealth from me. I married someone who never shared anything truly important." I stood frozen, my heart pounding. But instead of arguing, I walked out of the room. I needed proof. I needed to know if his claim was merely a bluff. And when I called my father's actual lawyer, the real Mr. Peterson, not this so-called Jerry, I learned things were worse than I thought. Mr. Peterson sighed after hearing my story. "Jaden, there's no licensed attorney named Jerry Peterson in this state. You've been scammed, and if Jack paid that person, he may have fallen victim to a legal fraud." It felt as if the air had been sucked from my lungs. Jack hadn't only attempted to steal my inheritance, he had also been gullible enough to lose a fortune in the process. But the deepest hurt didn't stem from the financial loss. It came from realizing I had loved and trusted someone completely unworthy. That night, I returned home to find Jack sitting at the dining table, his face pale. "Jerry's not answering his phone. I think I've been scammed." I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I simply placed the original property documents Mr. Peterson had just sent me on the table, along with a copy confirming I was the sole legal owner of the house. "You've crossed a line, Jack, and I have no reason to stay with you anymore." He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand to stop him. "There's no explanation that can fix the trust you destroyed." I walked out of the room quietly, but inside, a door had closed for good. And I knew from that moment, Jack was no longer part of my journey. 3 days after that final confrontation, I officially moved out of the apartment Jack and I had shared. I took only a suitcase of clothes and a wooden box containing my father's letters. Everything else, the memories, the dreams, the promises, I left behind like a stone sinking to the bottom of a lake. I moved back to the hillside mansion, my childhood home, now the only sanctuary I had left. I assumed that after exposing the truth and severing ties, Jack would quietly disappear from my life. But I had underestimated the greed and delusion still within him. That morning, as my mother and I walked in the backyard garden, the gate buzzer rang incessantly. On the security screen, I saw Jack standing outside, hands on his hips, face flushed, whether from anger or embarrassment I couldn't tell. I picked up the phone and connected to the intercom. "Jack, what are you doing here?" He looked directly into the camera, his voice loud and firm. "Jaden, I have a right to enter this house. You're holding it unlawfully. We need to talk." I responded calmly. "I am the legal owner. If you don't leave, I'll call the police." As if anticipating my reaction, Jack pulled a stack of papers from his coat pocket. "I had a new lawyer review everything. You think you're smart, but I'm not naive anymore." I didn't say another word. I immediately called the security team. In less than 5 minutes, 2 officers arrived and requested Jack leave the premises. He resisted, yelling that he was the victim, that he'd been tricked, that I had no heart. But I didn't go outside. I stood behind the glass door, watching him shout at the sky while the men who had once worked for my father silently performed their duties. That afternoon, I met with my lawyer to finalize something important: a restraining order. I no longer wished to live with the fear of Jack appearing at my door, alternating between pleading and threats. Just as we were finishing, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared. Jack was scammed out of $360,000. Jerry is a fake name, not licensed in any state. The message came from an old acquaintance in the legal field who had once collaborated with Jack on a marketing project. He knew Jack was spiraling, having lost his money, reputation, and marriage. It turned out the lawyer Jerry Jack had blindly trusted was a professional con artist, investigated multiple times for impersonating legal professionals and defrauding the gullible. Jack had wired him a substantial sum, $360,000, to expedite the ownership transfer, only to receive a series of forged documents so well crafted they nearly deceived me as well. I should have felt vindicated, but in truth, I simply felt empty. Jack had hurled himself into an abyss, and no one could pull him out but himself. That evening, I sat alone in my father's old library, the soft light glowing across the polished wooden desk. I opened a drawer and removed the letter my father had written to me before his passing. His familiar, steady handwriting calmed me just by its sight. "My dear Jaden, if one day you find your trust betrayed, remember, trust is the most precious thing we build. It takes time to create, but can vanish with a single lie. Don't mourn what was lost because losing what's unworthy is sometimes the only way to keep yourself." I folded the letter and took a deep breath. I knew I had entered a new chapter of life, without Jack, without the dreams others had tried to exploit. And if my father had bequeathed me anything more valuable than the hillside estate, it was the strength I held in that moment. Outside, the breeze whispered through the maple trees. I could hear my mother laughing with the gardener. Life was moving on, and for the first time in years, I felt truly in control, not only of the house, but of my heart. The divorce proceedings moved faster than anticipated, perhaps because Jack no longer had the energy to fight. He had no lawyer, no money, and most importantly, no trust left from me. We signed the papers at a small office in downtown Seattle, a place where no one knew my name or my past. So different from the sunny, laughter-filled wedding by Lake Tahoe just 2 years prior. Jack didn't say much during the signing. He kept his head down, dark circles under his eyes, hands trembling slightly. When the final stamp hit the paperwork, I stood first. I hope you find your way back to yourself. That was all I could say without letting my heart lose direction again. I returned to the estate and extended its familiar calm by transforming my father's old room into a space for meditation and reading. My mother, after staying with me for a time, began focusing on herself, taking art classes, gardening, walking each morning. The house, once wrapped in grief, was slowly breathing again. Then came the day of my father's first memorial. We kept it simple. A few close friends, longtime colleagues, and neighbors who had known our family since my childhood. Everything was thoughtfully prepared, from the small altar in the library to the white flowers lining the walkway. The setting was solemn yet warm. As the ceremony began, I noticed a familiar figure outside the iron gate. His eyes met mine through the security camera. I froze for a few seconds. Jack. He looked thinner than the last time I saw him. His shirt was wrinkled, hair slightly messy, eyes sunken. He placed a hand on his chest upon seeing me, as if silently pleading. I stepped onto the porch but kept my distance. "Why are you here, Jack?" He swallowed hard. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry to you and to him. I know I don't deserve to be here, but I need you to know I've lost everything." I looked at him, striving to keep my voice steady. "You had the chance to hold on to at least one thing, but you chose to give it all up for greed. I was duped. I was stupid. I get that now." The sound of chanting began inside. The guests had gathered. I took a deep breath, then spoke firmly. "Today is for my father. This isn't your stage for redemption. If you still have any respect for me or for him, please leave." Jack nodded but didn't move. He took a few steps back, eyes filled with one last silent plea. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just don't hate me." I stayed silent, not because I hated him, but because I had nothing left to feel. I signaled to the security guards. They understood, stepping out quietly without causing a scene. One spoke softly to Jack and escorted him away from the gate. I didn't look back. I returned inside where everyone waited, where my father's photo sat on the table, surrounded by white flowers and glowing candles. The ceremony proceeded. No one mentioned Jack's appearance, as if he had never crossed that gate. But within me, something closed for good. Not the relationship, but the last fragments of regret.